Now, in the circles in the media and business, we're dealing with another phenomenon. We're dealing with cowardice. Cowardice. Being called a racist is about the worst thing you can be called in our society. Some people say, well, clearly it's not because you survive after I've called you a racist. No, it isn't. It is about the nastiest thing you can say. It's also, by the way, and I've written about this in the past, one of the fascinating things about it is it's impossible to prove. There is no agreed upon definition, and it is impossible to disprove.
Of course.
Because, of course, we have had in this country for 20 years the idea that it's all in the eye of the beholder. So that if you think it's racist, ergo, it is racist. This is an incredibly damaging thing for a society. Now, this is where Black Lives Matter and other such movements do very well. They mop up very happily and nicely in this terrain because they say anybody who opposes us and everything we're smuggling in behind our first demand must be a racist. Now, it is high time that more people in corporate life, more people in government life and elsewhere said, no, we know what you're doing. There are so many examples, by the way, of this happening in the past. Do you remember peace studies? Peace studies that mysteriously cropped up during the Cold War. Peace studies, if you didn't like this totally bogus crock, often, it has to be said, Russian-funded studies, you were against peace. How could you be against peace? That must mean you want to nuke everyone.
Outrage mobs, virtue signalling and erasing history. Douglas Murray just ripped into the professional grievance industry and their endless cycle of guilt-mongering. From rights movements spiraling into absurdity to universities preaching woke dogma, Murray's exposing the racket behind modern outrage culture. Why are corporations groveling to mobs while ignoring real issues like housing or migration? Why is Britain apologizing for its past instead of defending its legacy? This isn't progress, it's self-loathing wrapped in virtue signalling.
Well, joining me for stepping up today is somebody who really has stepped up. In fact, I'm beginning to wonder, looking at his latest book, The Madness of Crowds, I'm beginning to wonder whether he's an even bigger controversialist than I am. So I'm in conversation today with the one and only Douglas Murray. Douglas, this is the latest book, and I couldn't help but look at the chapter headings.
Oh, no.
Chapter 1, gay. Chapter 2, women. Chapter 3, race. Chapter 4, trans. I mean, are you setting out to just try and enrage everybody?
No, I'm not. I was recently doing an event at a university, and the student who was interviewing me started by reading that page, and there was this wonderful, it had an absolutely packed hall, and everybody sat in silence as he went through the list. And when he got to the end, I just looked at them and smiled, and we all burst out laughing. And I was, I think there is a knowledge, isn't there, that we now know what the things are you're meant to not talk about. They happen to coincide with things that are very, very interesting, and which I think we should be able to talk about. So I do it deliberately in a way. I say, why don't we have a talk about this? Why don't we address this issue? And my belief is, and the response has been, that the public want to have these discussions too.
It's interesting, The Madness of Crowds. I mean, I love the title, because over the last few months, everywhere I go, I get out of the car and put petrol in the car, people walk up to me and say, Nigel, what's going on?
Right.
What's happening? So I think you're right. I think there's a big silent majority out there very, very worried about what's happening to free speech. But can you just, I know the basic thesis of this book is that all these groups had every right to feel a degree of discrimination against them. They fought for equal rights in a number of ways and pretty much achieved them. But the thesis of the book is that they've kind of not stopped with their victories. Did we just sort of explain that?
That's very common in lots of movements, isn't it, historically? There's a famous quote. Eric Hoffer said that every good cause, starts as a good cause, becomes a business and degenerates into a racket. And that's happened in almost every rights case I can think of. Gay, which I do the first movement, gay rights, basically got there some years ago. But there are all these organizations like Stonewall, What do you do if you're one of the big gay panjandrums at Stonewall? You want your pension, you want your salary.
You've got to find a new cause.
You've got to find a new cause. Now, Stonewall found trans, and now it goes around telling people in schools what they should teach kids about trans. And, of course, at this stage, having won, they've never been richer, they've never been more mainstream, they get in all the corporate donations, and then, before you know it, you get the situation we've got where corporations invite Stonewall in to give them a mark, like whether they're good boys or not. So this is ridiculous. This has nothing to do with the original aim of the gay rights movement, which was just to get to equality and stop. These people find it really hard to stop.
And I mean, J.K. Rowling, who hardly is a political controversialist, and yet has sort of faced quite a degree of hatred over this.
The same thing. All of these things are interconnected. I say in the chapter, gay is a minority issue. Relations between men and women is a majority issue. Certainly used to be. And relations between men and women cannot be as divisive as they've been made in recent years. I say there, though, you see, what we've got this problem with is what happens when the feminists have won. Feminists throughout the 20th century say we want to have equality with men. They get to equality, and then you get this weird overreach because you've got all these professional feminists. You have people who want a cause. You have people who are in the habit of standing at barricades.
Here's the deal. Every rights movement starts noble, achieves success, and then spirals into absurdity because no one wants to pack up and go home. Gay rights? Won. Feminism, equality achieved. But now we have Stonewall raking in corporate cash to lecture kids on pronouns, and feminists demanding men apologize for existing. It's a racket. Corporations virtue signal with equality scores, while real problems, like housing or declining birth rates, get ignored. Progress? More like professional outrage.
And they don't have anywhere else to go.
But in the case of Black Lives Matters, you know America pretty well, as I do. I would say that it's a reasonable assumption to think that we have perhaps been a fairer country in terms of race than parts of the USA. I mean, what I'm saying is, look, I can't stand the tearing down of statues, mob rule. And we saw that extraordinary picture the other day of a woman innocently sitting outside a restaurant, being surrounded by a mob. And it was compared to 1933 in Germany, and people being made to raise their right arm in support of the Führer. I mean, so we've seen all of that, but does the Black Lives Matter movement in America, does it need to exist in some form?
So, all of these rights claims start somewhere decent, which is a request for equality. Now, I entirely agree, by the way. America and Britain are very different countries, and I resent the importing of a specific American racial issue to the British context, for instance. I was brought up in a Britain that was very diverse already. We didn't know about people's skin colours. We didn't notice it. We were brought up to who cared? We were. Of course, there were some people who've had experiences of racism, but broadly speaking, Britain, by the last few decades, we didn't care about this stuff.
So how is it? And I agree with you. I mean, after all my years in Europe, I learned that we are by far more tolerant than our European neighbours on a range of religious and racial issues.
Absolutely. There's no other country in Europe that would have the kind of diversity in the cabinet that we have, and it's not like it's got any opposition.
So how, and I agree with you on that, how is it that within a nanosecond, the death of George Floyd in America becomes huge, organised, and it looks like quite well-funded protests in this country? How did that happen?
Well, it's the same story. Again, in the case of America, there is a specific racial issue which that country has been struggling to address for a long time. You get something like the death of George Floyd, and by the way, I think everyone has to be really careful about this. The cop in question has no defenders, Nobody thinks that arresting cop and again, it's never mentioned, but it's like a diverse group of people who he was working with. Nobody defends what they did that day. Black Lives Matter as an organisation...
Would you defend it?
What he did?
Yeah.
No. Okay. No, I mean, the arresting officer clearly did it as badly as anyone could. We will, I suppose, find out at his trial whether there was a racial component to it or not. But as my friend Sam Harris pointed out, every year in the United States there are 10 million interactions between the police and the citizenry, the most armed citizenry, as you know, in the world. And so There are difficulties in American policing which we shouldn't underestimate. The idea, though, that you respond to it by saying all of the American police are racist, or all of America is racist, and then much worse, oh, Britain is racist, and then all of Britain's past is racist, and then there's nothing good to be said for a country like this.
How did it explode as quickly?
Because they were primed and ready and waiting to go.
Yeah.
This is a movement that needs martyrs. It seeks martyrdoms. It has given us already false martyrdoms. We had the shooting in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. This is one of the main things that starts the Black Lives Matter movement. It's claimed that the man who was shot had his hands in the air and said, "Hands up, don't shoot." This is what Black Lives Matter protesters used to say. At the subsequent trial, it turned out, and even BLM ended up basically admitting it, they didn't admit it, they just dropped it, that the man in question didn't have his hands in the air. He was lunging for the arresting officer's gun when he was shot.
The Black Lives Matter movement thrives on a narrative of martyrdom, often twisting facts to fit its agenda. Take Ferguson in 2014. Hands up, don't shoot became a rallying cry, yet investigations revealed the man was lunging for the officer's gun. Still, the lie fueled protests. The UK importing this chaos after George Floyd's death is absurd. Britain isn't America. With one of the most diverse cabinets in Europe, labelling the nation racist is lazy, divisive, and dishonest.
And that is the sort of thing that gets you shot in American
So
policing. They were looking for martyrs.
And they were ready and organised in the UK as well.
Yes, and the crucial thing is, we have allowed in Britain, as in America, but in Britain, as we say, with much less cause, we have allowed a movement to be gestating away that has in its sights everything in our history. There's two generations in America who have been taught that America is the worst country in the world. They're not taught that it has flaws like all countries. They don't know, by the way, about any other country. I mean, the staggering ignorance of so many people who are the ones, by the way, at the moment, who always say, educate yourself. You know, you need to educate yourself. These are always the most ignorant people you can come across. But the Educate Yourself Brigade know nothing about the world. They've never been anywhere. They can't compare American civilization with any other civilization. They think that America's the only country that ever had slavery. Every civilization in the world had slavery. They think that Britain is to be defined by slavery. They don't even know that this country tore itself apart over the slavery debate centuries ago. And it cost us, and we paid the price.
And 50 years, the Royal Navy, the West Africa Squadron, driving slavery off the high seas.
We paid the price for this because we thought morally it was a price worth paying. And these people now come along and say to an ignorant generation, you don't need to know about that, you just need to know racism.
Educated people in this country know about the abolition of slavery. They know about the Wilberforce campaign over 25 years. I think he's rather like the first Eurosceptic, you know, taking on the establishment and winning, but it's taking a long time. But think about the media in this country. Think about our big corporate businesses in this country. These are the educated groups of people. These are the people that know the truth about Britain's relationship with slavery as opposed to the rest of the world. How is it, and you've been through this too, but how is it?
The Educate Yourself Brigade loves to preach, but they're woefully ignorant about the very history they claim to champion. They think America invented slavery, as if every civilization throughout history didn't engage in it. Britain? They ignore the 50 years the Royal Navy spent dismantling the slave trade, the Wilberforce-led abolition movement, or the fact that Britain paid the price, morally and financially, to end slavery. Instead, they reduce history to simplistic narratives to fuel outrage.
A couple of days after the Colston statue was toppled in Bristol, and I can say to an ITV audience that Black Lives Matters is actually more about bringing down capitalism, getting rid of the structures of state, defunding the police, and I'm called on primetime television a liar for saying something that's actually on their website. What happened to the media? What's happening to our corporates? Why?
There's lots of things going on in that. One is there are some people who genuinely are so ignorant that they think this is the case.
But surely not in those circles of the media and business.
Now, in the circles of the media and business, we're dealing with another phenomenon. We're dealing with cowardice. Cowardice. Being called a racist is about the worst thing you can be called in our society. Some people say, well, clearly it's not because you survive after I've called you a racist. No, it isn't. It is about the nastiest thing you can say. It's also, by the way, and I've written about this in the past, one of the fascinating things about it is it's impossible to prove. There is no agreed upon definition, and it is impossible to disprove.
Of course.
Because, of course, we have had in this country for 20 years the idea that it's all in the eye of the beholder. So that if you think it's racist, ergo it is racist. This is an incredibly damaging thing for a society. Now, this is where Black Lives Matter and other such movements do very well. They mop up very happily and nicely in this terrain, because they say anybody who opposes us and everything we're smuggling in behind our first demand must be a racist. Now, it is high time that more people in corporate life, more people in government life and elsewhere said, no, we know what you're doing. There are so many examples, by the way, of this happening in the past. Do you remember peace studies? Peace studies that mysteriously cropped up during the Cold War.
The media and corporate elites have become spineless cowards, terrified of being labelled racist, the ultimate scarlet letter in modern society. It's a weaponized term, impossible to define or disprove, making it the perfect tool for groups like Black Lives Matter to silence dissent. They smuggle in radical agendas, defunding police, dismantling capitalism, while hiding behind moral outrage. And corporations? They roll over, virtue signalling for PR points, too scared to call out the blatant manipulation.
Totally bogus crock. Often, it has to be said, Russian-funded studies. You were against peace. How could you be against peace? That must mean you want to nuke everyone.
So what words do they call you, Douglas? What do you get called?
Oh, I don't know.
Come on, give us a list.
I imagine I get everything. I mean, I'm obviously a terrible bigot in every way, a horrible transphobe, obviously a gay homophobe. I suffer clearly from every available bigotry.
But I mean, the reason I'm asking you is because, you know, I think I've received more than my fair share of abuse over the years.
More than anyone, I'd have thought.
More than anyone. And I just wonder, how do you deal with it?
Oh, I don't care.
You genuinely
genuinely don't care. To my mind, the formation of character is in large part reliant on knowing who you should care about and who you should not. Knowing who you should listen to and who you should not. Now, there's a small number of people, family, loved ones, my best friends, people I admire, who if they say, you know, Douglas, I think you're wrong on that, I would listen. Definitely would listen.
Yeah.
But if somebody called, you know, Xena, Warrior, Princess, 1, 2, 3, Social Justice Now says that they think I'm something.
You don't worry, Sue.
I don't lose any sleep.
But you're an interesting phenomenon because, you know, in France, intellectuals are, you know, held up on a pedestal. They're seem to be a very important part of French.
Yes, I've often admired this aspect of French culture.
But you're an intellectual, and yet, you know, you're producing these books that are bestsellers. How do you cut it as an intellectual in Britain?
Well, we do have a very fine intellectual tradition in Britain.
But it's not respected.
I wouldn't say it's not respected. There is an enormous oddity about this country, which I think I could sum up as follows.
The modern outrage mob is a pack of anonymous losers, like Xena Warrior Princess 123, spewing accusations for sport. Being labelled a racist, transphobe, or bigot is their currency, despite lacking an ounce of intellect or historical knowledge. BLM, for example, demands the destruction of capitalism while securing $90 million in donations. Irony much. Meanwhile, cowards in the media and corporations grovel to the mob, too spineless to fact-check their own headlines. Pathetic.
The British are traditionally suspicious of ideas, and those of us who are right of centre or conservative thinkers have here a great conundrum. The British suspicion of ideas
because we muddle through.
Yes. The British suspicion of ideas to a great extent is itself a good idea. My late friend Roger Scruton was very eloquent on this point, because the innate instinct of somebody to be, for instance, concerned about ideas is in part a concern about utopians. You see, the continent has in history repeatedly fallen prey to utopian ideas.
Yeah, we don't
and
do
the
that.
British people haven't historically liked that. And that is an enormous advantage. But of course, if you're interested in ideas yourself, then you have this conundrum. I would put it like this. The suspicion of grand ideas is a good suspicion to have, because when people come at you with an idea that they know better than you how you should live your life, you should run 1,000,000 miles.
Yes.
But
Yes.
sometimes,
I think I agree with that.
sometimes you live in an era replete with terrible ideas, and it is not enough to say, I will just ignore them, because you're living among them. They surround you. They're in the air you breathe.
And
They're
that's
what
why-
your
and that's
children
why
are being
you're-
given at
That's
school.
why you're challenging them.
Yes, I think it is vital that the British public realise that their children are being given ideas that are rotten.
Now, this is where I want to go next with this conversation, because I've been reading what you've been saying about universities. And I remember when Blair said 20 years ago that we send 50% to university, and I sort of slightly wondered, is this a way of producing lots and lots of new young Labour voters? Little did he know how successful he would be.
Yeah.
I'm not an intellectual. I think I'm more of a business pragmatist. But I can see that from the age of, 13, 14,
The British suspicion of grand ideas is both a blessing and a curse. It's brilliant for dodging the utopian disasters that have plagued the continent, like communism or fascism, but dangerous when bad ideas creep in unnoticed. Today, universities churn out indoctrinated drones, not critical thinkers. Blair's push for 50% university attendance, genius for creating Labour voters, disastrous for intellectual diversity. Now kids are spoon-fed rotten ideologies, while parents shrug. Ignorance isn't bliss, it's surrender. Wake up.
that from the age of, 13, 14, right through school, university, we need to teach people critical thinking. Here's a problem, here are two solutions, you make your mind up which of these you agree with. And I think what we're now doing, and you've studied this more than me, but I think what we're doing is we're saying to people, here's a problem, here are two solutions. One is virtuous and good and one is evil. And we're not teaching, is that at the root of what's wrong with our universities? How bad is it in your view?
My view is that every age has a religious instinct. All people have a religious instinct. In our own age, the religious instinct has been subsumed into a cultural religious instinct. People are being indoctrinated into a cult-like religion. They are being told what good behavior is and what bad behavior is, what a good person would be and what a terrible person looks like.
And this is in terms of attitude,
These are attitudes.
not behaviours.
No, this is what's more, of course, this is all part of the racket. What signals should you give off to demonstrate that you're in the good group?
Yes.
And what's more, what if you are in the group, say for instance you have the horrible tendency to have been a white male, for instance. What can you do to demonstrate you're not one of the evil group? Oh, well, now, like the most hucksterish religion, you can demonstrate that you're a good person by showing solidarity with the latest crock cause. You can show that you're an ally of anything that you're meant to ally with today. You can say how shamed you feel. These all religious instincts. You can even pay your tithes. If you're a corporation, by the way, never mind the universities, you know that this mob might come for you. Cheapest way you can get out of it. Oh dear, we seem to be a bank that has a reputation for employing lots of men, for instance. Well, why don't we just pay our tithes to Black Lives Matter? And
Modern universities and corporations are neck deep in a cult-like religion, where virtue signalling is the new gospel. Critical thinking? Forget it. Students aren't asked to weigh solutions. They're told one is righteous and the other is evil. White male? Congratulations, you're born into original sin. Want redemption? Grovel, apologize and ally with whatever cause is trending. Corporations? They pay their woke tithes to dodge the mob. It's not education or progress. It's a racket wrapped in guilt.
it's the Black Lives Matter and get over it.
Paying the Danegeld is what
Paying
we're
the
doing.
Danegeld.
Yeah.
So this is what's happened. We've got a new morality, a new religion that has come in this country. I've tried to identify it for years, and this is the clearest example of it.
So, the real question, it's one thing to stand up and try and raise issues, and you've done a huge amount on this. I myself, in a more modest way, try to raise the issue of what was happening across the English Channel earlier this year. And I know you wrote about this with sort of the death of Europe a few years ago, talking about the Mediterranean and what was happening there. So I, like you, I think I'm quite good at raising issues, getting people thinking and talking about things. But what are we going to do to try and solve this? What are we going to do? I mean, to begin with, what are we going to do to get our universities back to where they need to be?
I'm a great believer in truth. I honestly believe that truth has an extraordinary ability to cut through.
In the end?
In the end. God knows it's unpleasant in the interim period. But let me give you an example. I've just been writing about a book by a very distinguished neuroscientist from Canada called Dr. Deborah So. She's just written a book called The End of Gender. And she just lays out, she's a liberal thinker. She just lays out, you can't keep pretending that sex doesn't exist. You just can't. And this is what you're going to do. Now, the people who've been wading through that argument have had a tough time. But it's the same as you know on every argument. The argument I said in The Strange Death of Europe over the migration question was, we haven't asked the big question. What is the big question in migration? I would say it's this, the following conundrum. We would like to be kind and welcoming to people in the world who have just the worst luck, living in war zones, horrible situations in terrible countries that have been run down by despotic leaders. We'd like to be generous to them. Can we take them all in? No.
We've got a new religion, all right, but it's not one of truth. It's a cult of denial and virtue signaling. Universities preach fantasies like sex doesn't exist, and questioning it makes you a heretic. Migration, same delusion. We want to help everyone fleeing hellholes, but here's the brutal truth. We can't save the world by importing it. Kindness without limits is chaos. The solution, face reality, set boundaries, and stop drowning in guilt.
I have tried for years to persuade people to think about that. But so what we have, and I do this all the time with my, as it were, left-wing liberal friends and interlocutors on this, is to say, you know that's the conundrum. You know it's that. You know we can't take in everyone in the world who lives in worse situations than us. What do? All they can do is to dodge that question. They've dodged it for years. All they can do is dodge it and say anyone who doesn't agree with them today is racist. What they're doing is unsustainable. What they're arguing is unsustainable. And I find on each of these issues, as with the migration one, that's why I'm confident about it.
So if we win the intellectual argument, does political action then necessarily follow?
No, you can win an intellectual argument and lose politically. Maybe we are in a part.
Do we have a Conservative Party?
Well, that's another version of it. You win politically and lose intellectually. That's the flip side. That's the one I think that we are at least in part in the UK. We have a Conservative government with an 80-seat majority, and yet every day there is an example of something which no Conservative could possibly agree to. When our government was missing in action, when I wouldn't just say statues, our holy places as a nation were being assailed. When the cenotaph was daily being defaced, and we saw a video of Black Lives Matter protesters saying to that extraordinary young group of volunteers, young men and women who turned out to be from the Household Cavalry, who on their own time came to clean that. Somebody said from Black Lives Matter, you care about your precious monuments. That was when we should say yes. Yes, we care about our precious monuments. They're not precious little monuments. These are our holiest places, and we make no apology for it. Now, nobody from government said that.
The left dodges every tough question with the same tired playbook. Label dissenters as racist and move on. Migration. They'll never admit it's unsustainable. Instead, they peddle fantasies of infinite generosity while ignoring reality. Meanwhile, in the UK, we have a so-called Conservative government with an 80-seat majority, yet they're MIA when our most sacred monuments, like the cenotaph, are defaced. Newsflash, these aren't precious little monuments. They're the backbone of our history and identity. Grow a spine.
I know, and yet Middle England is saying it. I sense it, I feel it, and I think the BBC have overstepped the mark completely on the words of Land of Hope and Glory and Rule Britannia.
I cannot understand what the BBC is thinking on this. They give the impression of a guiltiness that makes me very suspicious. What had the BBC to do with the killing of George Floyd? Why do they present it as if they were in some way complicit? They run a video the other day saying, we've always tried to do our best, we know we need to do more. What are you hiding? What's the problem with you people? Why do you think that because of a Minnesotan policeman's actions, we're not allowed to sing Rule Britannia? You think we can't cope with a few verses of song? You think we're going to invade France if we sing Rule Britannia? You think we're going to start lynching people if we sing Land of Hope and Joy?
Perhaps they do. I don't know. I mean, let's go to North London to find out. I don't know.
I think this is very revealing. These people do not trust themselves, so they don't trust us. But we do trust ourselves. We know that the British people are a decent people and that we can cope with songs.
This is almost, isn't it, the Remain-Leave divide? Because I've noticed on many of these debates about how disgusting British history is and how we should all be ashamed of it, quite a lot of Remainers seem to be leading those arguments. I really have noticed that.
Yes.
I mean, it's fundamentally whether you believe in the country or not, and if you believe in the country, you accept it may have had past failings.
Yes. One of the things I'm trying to do at the moment on this is to encourage people to all these people say they want us to understand our past better. I say, yes, sure, everybody can understand the past better, but that has to be a rounded and proper understanding of the past. And here's the problem. We are facing, on that issue as on so many others, critics who do not have our best interests at heart. It comes back to what we said about who you would listen to as a person. I listen to my friends and my family and my loved ones because I know they desire me well. They want me to do well. They want me to do the best I can. I don't listen to somebody who has the worst possible hopes about me because I know they don't want me to do well. Well, it's the same as a nation. I will listen endlessly to people who recognise the generosity and greatness of Britain across the centuries when they say, there is this thing you could do better at, or this element of your history you should understand better. I can listen to that forever. What I am now unwilling to listen to is people who think there was nothing good about this country, never was anything good, just as there are people who think there was nothing good about America. Better had Columbus never sailed off. Don't listen to these people. They don't wish to improve you, they wish to end you.
In 5 years' time, if I sat back here with you, would we have reversed this current madness that is sweeping the Western world?
I'm actually confident that we can.
But I tell you what, that's a pretty good note to end on. Be confident, big ideas, and I tell you what, if you've got a really woke friend, you want to upset them. What a great present.
The BBC apologising for Britain's past while banning patriotic songs like Rule Britannia is peak self-flagellation. What's next? Burning the Union Jack because someone in Minnesota got killed. This isn't about justice. It's about self-loathing disguised as progress. Britain has flaws, who doesn't? But it also abolished slavery, stood against fascism, and shaped democracy. If someone says there's nothing good about this country, they don't want reform. They want Britain erased. Stop apologising. Start defending. So any thoughts on what Douglas just discussed? Share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you never miss any of Douglas's debates.